I spent 6 months crafting the perfect wedding, only for a spoiled heiress to smash my reputation with a piece of cake. Little did she know, that single act of humiliation would be the best thing that ever happened to me.
The scent of buttercream and hydrangeas was supposed to be the smell of my triumph. For 6 months, I had poured every ounce of my soul into planning the wedding of Michael and Jessica Vanderbilt. We're talking a budget that could buy a small island, a guest list glittering with old money, and expectations higher than the crystal chandeliers hanging in the grand ballroom. I'm an event planner, and this wedding was my masterpiece, the one that would cement my company's reputation as the best in the city. Every fork was perfectly aligned, every flower petal was flawless, and the 7-tiered wedding cake stood like a monument to my meticulous planning. It was perfect. And then, Madison Vanderbilt, the groom's younger sister, walked in. From the moment she arrived, she was a storm cloud in a $1,000 dress. While everyone else marveled at the decor, Madison sneered. She ran a manicured finger along a silk-draped table and checked it for dust. She complained that the string quartet was playing Vivaldi a quarter-tone flat. I handled it with the plastic smile and deferential nods I've perfected over the years. Of course, Madison. I'll speak to them. Right away, Madison. My job was to make the client happy, and even though she wasn't technically the client, the Vanderbilt name meant she might as well be. I've dealt with difficult bridesmaids and demanding mothers-in-law, but Madison was a special breed of entitled. She seemed to exist only to find fault, her eyes constantly scanning for a crack in the perfect facade I had built. Her venom found its target soon enough, me. It started with subtle jabs. When I was coordinating with the catering captain, she'd walk by and mutter just loud enough for me to hear. I can't believe they let anyone with a clipboard run a Vanderbilt event these days. Later, when I was checking on the bar, she cornered me. "Is this top shelf?" she demanded, gesturing vaguely at the rows of premium liquor. Because the last wedding my family attended, the planner tried to pass off cheap vodka. It was so common. She looked me up and down, her gaze lingering on my simple professional black dress. The implication was clear. I kept my cool, my voice even and professional. "I can assure you, Madison, everything is exactly as approved by your parents and the bride and groom, only the best." I refused to give her the reaction she so clearly craved. But the air was crackling with her hostility, and I felt a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. The night was going too smoothly. Something had to give. The breaking point came during the cake cutting. Michael and Jessica had just shared their first piece, laughing as they smudged a bit of frosting on each other's noses. The guests applauded, the cameras flashed. It was a picture-perfect moment. I stood near the back, allowing myself a small private smile of satisfaction. It was then that I saw Madison approaching the cake table, a champagne flute dangling precariously from her fingers. She looked drunk, but her eyes were sharp, glinting with a cold, calculated malice. She picked up a clean silver server, sliced off a huge wedge of the intricate cake, and plopped it onto a plate. Then she turned and walked directly towards me. The smile on her face was a predatory slash. My own smile faltered. "Madison, can I help you?" I asked, my professional mask slipping back into place. "You can," she slurred, her voice carrying across the now quieting room. Several guests were turning to watch. "I've been thinking. This whole night, it's all a bit much, isn't it? Trying so hard to be something you're not." She gestured around the opulent ballroom, then her eyes landed back on me. "Just like you." My blood ran cold. I could feel dozens of pairs of eyes on us. "I'm not sure what you mean," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Oh, I think you do," she said, taking a step closer. The smell of champagne on her breath was suffocating. "You walk around here with your little clipboard and your headset, acting like you belong. but you're just the help, a hired hand. You should remember your place." Before I could even process the insult, she moved. It happened in a blur of motion. 1 second, the plate was in her hand. The next, it was being shoved hard into my face. The world exploded into a soft, sticky mess of vanilla buttercream and lemon curd. The force of it knocked me back a step. I felt the thick frosting filling my nostrils, smearing across my cheeks and into my hair. A collective gasp rippled through the room, followed by a sickening high-pitched giggle from Madison. "There," she said, her voice ringing with triumph as I stood there utterly frozen in shock and humiliation. Silence. A thick, horrified silence descended upon the grand ballroom. The string quartet had stopped playing. For a long, agonizing moment, the only sound was Madison's smug breathing. I couldn't see anything through the frosting in my eyes, but I could feel the weight of everyone's pity and shock. My career, my reputation, my dignity, all shattered in a single, sticky, degrading second. I wanted the marble floor to swallow me whole. Then a new sound cut through the silence, the slow, deliberate click of expensive leather shoes on marble. The sound was approaching, measured and heavy with authority. A deep voice, cold as a winter morning, spoke a single name: Madison. I wiped a glob of cake from my eye just enough to see. It was Mr. Vanderbilt, the patriarch, the man who signed the checks, the man whose opinion was the only one that truly mattered in this room. He wasn't looking at me. His gaze was fixed on his daughter, and his face was a mask of thunder. I had never seen a man look so utterly, terrifyingly furious. He stood another deliberate step forward, his polished shoes silent on the thick Persian rug near the cake table. The entire ballroom, filled with 100 of the city's most influential people, was so quiet you could hear the fizz of champagne bubbles dying in their glasses. "He asked you a question, Madison," he said, his voice dangerously low. "What have you done?" She tried to rally, puffing out her chest. "Daddy, it was just a joke." She was being so stuffy. I was trying to lighten the mood. Her laugh was a brittle, desperate sound that shattered against the wall of silence.
Mr. Vanderbilt didn't even glance at her. His eyes, a sharp, piercing blue, found mine. I was a mess, my professional black dress stained with white frosting, my hair matted with it, my face a sticky mask of public humiliation. I was trying to wipe the goo from my eyes with a cocktail napkin, my hands shaking. He walked past his daughter as if she were a piece of furniture and stopped directly in front of me. He was an imposing man, but right then his expression was one of profound, almost pained regret. "Miss Sharma," he said, and the simple act of him using my name, of acknowledging me as a professional, felt like a life raft. "On behalf of my entire family, I am deeply, profoundly sorry. There is no excuse for this behavior. It is vile and it is unacceptable." He pulled a pristine, monogrammed handkerchief from his breast pocket and offered it to me. I took it, my fingers trembling. "Thank you, Mr. Vanderbilt," I managed to choke out. My voice was thick with unshed tears and frosting. "Daddy, what are you doing?" shrieked, her voice cracking with disbelief. "You're apologizing to her? She works for us. She's the help." That was the word that did it. The word that turned Mr. Vanderbilt from a furious father into an executioner. He turned his head slowly, his gaze locking onto Madison with an intensity that made me physically flinch. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "The help?" he repeated, his voice barely a whisper, yet it echoed with menace. "Miss Sharma is the founder and CEO of a highly successful company that we hired for her expertise. She is a respected business owner. You," he said,
taking a step toward Madison, who instinctively recoiled, are a 24-year-old girl who has never worked a day in her life, who lives in an apartment I pay for, drives a car I bought, and wears clothes paid for with a credit card that has my name on it. The only thing you have ever produced is disappointment. Every word was a hammer blow. The guests were frozen, a captive audience to a family drama more gripping than any opera. Madison's face had gone from smug to panicked to ghostly pale. Tears welled in her eyes, not of remorse, but of pure, selfish rage and indignation. "You can't talk to me like that," she wailed, "not in front of all these people." "Oh, I can," he said, his voice like chips of ice. "And I will. You seem to have forgotten that the Vanderbilt name is not a shield for you to hide behind while you behave like a spoiled animal. It is a legacy of integrity, respect, and decency. 3 things you have just proven you know nothing about." He gestured to his wife, a statuesque woman who had been watching with a stony expression. She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. That was all the confirmation he needed. Mr. Vanderbilt reached into his jacket and pulled his phone. Madison watched him, her breath catching in her throat. He wasn't bluffing. This wasn't a lecture she could just tune out. This was something else entirely. He scrolled through his contacts, his thumb moving with methodical precision. The room was a vacuum, sucking all the air and sound into the small, glowing screen in his hand. He pressed the call button and lifted the phone to his ear. "Stephen, it's Robert Vanderbilt. I apologize for calling you during the event. Yes, everything is fine, but I have a directive for you." He paused, his cold eyes still locked on his now sobbing daughter. "I want you to call the dealership first thing Monday morning. The custom G-Wagon registered to my daughter is to be repossessed immediately. I don't care about the penalty, just get it done." A strangled gasp escaped Madison's lips. That car was her prized possession, her symbol of status. But her father wasn't finished. His thumb was already dialing another number. "Hello, Jean-Pierre, Robert Vanderbilt. I need you to do something for me tonight. Yes, right now. The Amex Black Card, ending in 1007. I want you to cancel it, permanently." He listened for a moment, his face impassive. "No, it hasn't been stolen. It has been revoked." He hung up and looked at Madison, who was now openly weeping, her mascara running in black rivulets down her cheeks. "You wanted to know your place, Madison?" he asked, his voice devoid of all warmth. He took a step back and addressed one of the uniformed security guards standing discreetly by the ballroom entrance. "Frank," he called out, his voice ringing with command, "please escort my daughter out of the building." The guard, a burly man named Frank, who I had briefed myself just hours earlier, looked startled but immediately started walking toward Madison. Humiliation washed over her face. Being thrown out of her own brother's wedding, it was unthinkable. But then Mr. Vanderbilt held up a hand, stopping the guard in his tracks. A flicker of hope sparked in Madison's eyes. Maybe he was reconsidering. Maybe this was all just a scare tactic. But the look on Mr. Vanderbilt's face was not one of reconciliation. It was one of chilling finality. He turned not to Madison, but to his own wife, and spoke loud enough for the first few rows of guests and me to hear clearly. "Call the family lawyer," he instructed her, his voice flat and absolute. "Tell him to be in my office at 9 a.m. Monday. We're initiating the process to have Madison formally removed from the family trust." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Removed from the family trust. It wasn't just about cutting off her allowance or taking away her car. It was an excommunication, a severance from the very source of her identity, her power, her entire existence. The Vanderbilt Trust was legendary,
a vast ocean of wealth that ensured generations of Vanderbilts would never have to worry about something as trivial as money. To be cut off from it was to be cast out into a world she was completely unprepared for. Madison stared at her father, her mouth agape. The tears stopped, replaced by a look of sheer, uncomprehending horror. It was as if he'd just announced he was revoking her access to oxygen. "No," she whispered, the word a tiny broken sound. "You can't. You wouldn't." "I can and I will," Mr. Vanderbilt stated, his face an unreadable granite slab. "You have mistaken our wealth for your worth. You have mistaken our name for a license to be cruel. Tonight you did not just humiliate Miss Sharma. You humiliated this entire family. You took a moment of joy and love, your own brother's wedding, and you twisted it into a showcase for your own ugliness." He turned to his wife, who was already on her phone, her back to her weeping daughter, her movements crisp and efficient. The decision was made. The sentence had been passed. Frank, the security guard, now resumed his slow, heavy walk toward Madison. This time, no one stopped him. The reality of the situation finally crashed down on her. This wasn't a threat. This was her new life, starting right now. Panic seized her. She looked around desperately, her eyes pleading with the guests, with her mother, with her brother Michael, who stood by his new wife, both of them looking shocked and appalled. But no one moved to help her. No one would dare defy Robert Vanderbilt. "Please, Daddy, no," she sobbed, her voice raw. "I'm sorry. I'll apologize. I'll do anything." She took a stumbling step toward me, her hands outstretched. "I'm sorry," she cried, looking at me, but her eyes were still filled with a selfish terror, not genuine remorse. "Please, tell him it was a mistake."
I stood there, frozen, the monogrammed handkerchief still clutched in my hand, my face still sticky with her joke. Part of me, the part that had been so deeply and publicly shamed, felt a grim, cold satisfaction. But another part, the professional part, was horrified. This was a wedding. It was supposed to be a happy occasion, and it had devolved into a public execution. This was a disaster of epic proportions, and I was standing at the epicenter. Before I could even think of what to say, Frank reached her. He placed a firm but not unkind hand on her elbow. "Miss Vanderbilt, please, let's go." The touch seemed to break her. The fight went out of her, replaced by a wave of crushing despair. She allowed him to lead her away, her $1,000 dress dragging on the floor, her shoulders slumped in utter defeat. As she passed the cake table, she glanced at the magnificent seven-tiered creation, the symbol of the perfect evening she had just single-handedly destroyed. It was the last thing she saw before Frank escorted her through the grand ballroom doors, which swung shut behind her with a soft, final thud. The silence she left in her wake was even more profound than before. Mr. Vanderbilt let out a long, slow breath, the fury in his eyes replaced by a deep, weary sadness. He turned back to me. "Miss Sharma," he said, his voice softer now. "Again, my apologies. The rest of the evening's expenses are, of course, on us. And please, send my office an invoice for personal damages, dry cleaning, emotional distress, whatever you and your lawyer deem appropriate. There will be no argument." That won't be necessary, Mr. Vanderbilt," I stammered, still reeling. "It is entirely necessary," he insisted. He then turned to the stunned guests. "Everyone," he announced, his voice regaining its command, "please accept our sincerest apologies for that disgraceful interruption. Let it not cast a pall on why we are here, to celebrate the union of my son, Michael, and my wonderful new daughter-in-law, Jessica." He raised his glass. "To the happy couple." A hesitant chorus of "To the happy couple" echoed through the room. The string quartet, taking their cue, hesitantly began to play again. The spell was broken. Guests started murmuring. Waiters began circulating with fresh champagne. Slowly, carefully, the machinery of the perfect party I had built began to grind back into motion. But the atmosphere was forever changed. Everyone was stealing glances at me, whispering behind their hands. I was no longer the invisible, efficient planner. I was a central character in the scandal of the season. I excused myself and retreated to the ladies' lounge, my heart pounding in my chest. I stared at my reflection in the ornate, gilded mirror. Cake was caked in my eyebrows and eyelashes. My hair was a stiff, sugary mess. I looked ridiculous. I looked like a victim. The shame and anger I had been suppressing washed over me again, hot and fierce. I had worked so hard, not just on this wedding, but my entire career, to be seen as a competent, respected professional. Madison had tried to reduce me to a punchline in a matter of seconds. After splashing my face with cold water and doing my best to clean up, I took a deep breath. I was still on the clock. I had a wedding to finish running. I pasted my professional smile back on and walked out, ready to face the whispers and the pitying looks. But as I re-entered the ballroom, I saw something that made me stop dead in my tracks. Mr. Vanderbilt was in a quiet corner, engaged in a low, intense conversation with two other men. One was his son, the groom, Michael. The other was Thomas Prescott, CEO of Prescott Holdings, the single biggest corporate client in the city. Getting a contract with Prescott Holdings was the holy grail for any service business like mine. I had been trying for years to even get a meeting with him, to no avail. And right now, as I watched, Thomas Prescott was looking directly at me, and then he said something to Mr. Vanderbilt that made the older man's eyes widen in surprise. Mr. Vanderbilt nodded slowly, a thoughtful expression on his face. Then he looked up, his gaze meeting mine across the crowded room. He beckoned me over. My stomach did a nervous flip-flop as I walked toward the three most powerful men in the room, wondering what on earth could be coming next. My heels clicked a nervous rhythm on the marble as I approached them. Thomas Prescott was a legend, a man whose picture was on the cover of business magazines, and he was looking at me with an expression of keen interest. My mind raced. Was he going to complain? Was he somehow blaming me for the scene Madison had caused? I braced myself for the worst as I came to a stop before them. Mr. Vanderbilt said, his tone formal but not unkind, "This is Thomas Prescott. I believe you know who he is. And my son, Michael." I nodded to both of them, murmuring a polite gentleman. Mr. Prescott began, his voice a smooth baritone that commanded attention. "I must say, I am extraordinarily impressed." I blinked, completely thrown. "Impressed, sir?" I asked, confusion evident in my voice. "By what? The public dessert assault?" A small, wry smile touched his lips. "By your composure," he clarified. "I've been in boardrooms with Titan CEOs who have completely lost their nerve under a fraction of the pressure you were just subjected to. You stood there, in the face of an absolutely vile and humiliating attack, and you maintained your dignity. You didn't scream, you didn't cry, you didn't cause a bigger scene. You handled it with a level of grace and professionalism that is exceedingly rare." He glanced at Mr. Vanderbilt. "Robert here tells me you've built your company from the ground up with nothing but a small loan and your own grit." "That's correct, sir," I said, my voice gaining a little confidence. "And tonight," Mr. Vanderbilt added, his eyes holding a new level of respect, "you delivered a flawless event, right up until my daughter's inexcusable behavior. The logistics, the aesthetic, the execution, it's all impeccable. It's the smoothest large-scale event I've ever attended." Michael, the groom, stepped forward. "Jessica and we are so sorry for what my sister did, Miss Sharma. It was unforgivable. You've given us a beautiful day, and she tried to ruin it. Please, don't let that be what you remember about our wedding." I was floored. In the space of 10 minutes, I had gone from being the humiliated help to being praised by three of the most influential men in the city. The shame that had been clinging to me like a shroud began to dissipate, replaced by a warm, burgeoning sense of validation. Which brings me to my point, Mr. Prescott continued, getting straight to business. Prescott Holdings is hosting its annual International Philanthropy Gala in 3 months. It's our flagship event. The guest list includes dignitaries and executives from over 30 countries. The logistics are a nightmare, and for the past 2 years, the planning has been subpar. He paused, looking me directly in the eye. My heart started to beat faster. I knew where this was going, but it seemed too impossible to be true. I need someone with grace under pressure, someone with an unimpeachable eye for detail and the backbone to handle the immense stress of it all. Tonight, Miss Sharma, you've given me the most impressive job interview I've ever witnessed. The contract for the gala is yours if you want it. I couldn't speak. The Prescott Gala. It wasn't just a contract, it was a coronation. The planner who landed that event was automatically catapulted to the absolute top of the industry. It was a multi-million-dollar deal that would secure my company's future for years to come. It was the dream I had been chasing since I first started my business in my tiny apartment kitchen with a second-hand laptop. Yes, I finally managed to say, my voice trembling slightly. Yes, Mr. Prescott, I would be honored. Excellent, he said with a decisive nod. My assistant will call your office on Monday to begin the arrangements. It was a pleasure to meet you, Miss Sharma. He shook my hand firmly, and just like that, my entire world had changed. The rest of the wedding passed in a triumphant blur. The cloud of humiliation had lifted, replaced by an aura of respect. Guests who had previously looked at me with pity now approached me with congratulations, having overheard the news. The whispers were no longer about the girl who got a cake in the face, but about the planner who had just landed the Prescott contract. A few weeks later, I was in my new, much larger office, hammering out the final details for the gala. My company had exploded. I'd hired 10 new staff members just to handle the influx of calls from people who wanted the planner who impressed Thomas Prescott. My invoice for the Vanderbilt wedding had been paid instantly, with an additional 6-figure bonus labeled simply for damages. I put it towards college funds for my 2 new junior planners. I got a call one afternoon from an unknown number. I answered, and a hesitant voice on the other end said, "Miss Sharma, it's Madison Vanderbilt?" I was silent for a moment. I hadn't heard or thought about her since that night. I know you have no reason to listen to me," she stammered, her voice stripped of all its former arrogance. It was small and fragile. "But I wanted to properly apologize. What I did was disgusting. There's no excuse. I was a horrible, spoiled brat who thought hurting people made me powerful, and I lost everything because of it." She told me she was living in a small studio apartment, working as a waitress. Her father hadn't relented. She was truly on her own. I needed you to hear me say I'm sorry. You didn't deserve any of that." "Thank you, Madison," I said. And to my own surprise, I meant it. "I accept your apology. I hope you find what you're looking for." I hung up the phone, not with hatred or pity, but with a sense of closure. She had tried to humiliate me, to put me in what she thought was my place. But in doing so, she had only revealed her own. And in that same moment of her downfall, she had inadvertently handed me the keys to the kingdom. I looked around my bustling office, at the dedicated team I had built, at the plans for the biggest event of my career spread across my desk. The scent of success was far, far sweeter than buttercream.